growing. And the conference recording has started, so be careful what you say, because it will be on the record. And today, we have a very special speaker who can address being on the record. That is Dr. Ben Raimer, who is a Senior Vice President at UTMB and does a lot of the, or most of the legislative affairs for UTMB. And as a result of that job, he spends a lot of time with the legislature and educating them on health matters and also advocating for the school. But as a consequence of his job, he has a front row seat into what happens in the legislature. And we think a lot of times that what goes on down in Austin may or may not affect us, or it comes out and we're thinking, well, what were they thinking in doing that? And he can actually give some insight in this. He's given this same talk every year for, I guess, like the past 3 or 4 years. But every year it's different because everything keeps changing. And so he gave a lot of new insights. The legislative session has started, and I'm sure he'll also be able to update us on some things about what to expect. So without any further ado, Dr. Raimer.
Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. Does everybody hear me okay? You hear me all right? Good, thank you. Well, welcome to our Lunch and Learn. You eat and I talk, and later I will go around to eating, I think, and talk, too. You know, I'm sure I'm glad I did change a few slides, at least. You'd put me on the spot if I'd used last year's. Health policy, the reason we call it that is because that's what I told the title was going to be. And we got a lot of health care going on in the United States right now. We're still looking for ways to finance it all. And every time the legislature is in session, either in Washington or in Austin, there's always opportunities for funding to change and our ability to deliver care to our patients to be impacted by that. I think you have seen all the disclosures already. It's in your handout that you had, and our learning objectives here to illustrate the legislature's somewhat blurry understanding of health care and ways that we can improve that by educating our legislators, and also to produce some informational items that may help you with your patients as they become greater advocates for their own health care. I want to just think with you about those things. Our leadership in Texas did change a bit this year. We have our same governor, Governor Abbott, and our same lieutenant governor, Governor Patrick. We have, after 5 sessions, a new Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is elected by the members of the House of Representatives. All 150 of them have to have a majority to win. And it was unanimous this year that State Representative Dennis Bonnen from Angleton would be the Speaker of the House. And it's not a job that's foreign to him. He has been the assistant to the Speaker for a number of years, presiding as what's called the Speaker Pro Tem. That is, during the session when the Speaker vacates the Speaker's chair, Mr. Bonnen presided over the House of Representatives. And he can go fast and get bills out the door quicker than almost anybody I've seen. And also at the same time, give everybody an opportunity to express their opinion. And so he's very, very good at parliamentary procedure and presiding. He's also been very fair in the past to both sides of the aisle, so to speak. You know, that's an error because they don't sit on either side. They all sit together. Most often a Republican will have a desk mate that's a Democrat. So there are no aisles that divide people. There were a lot of speaker candidates all over the state, as a matter of fact. Dr. Zerwas from the Richmond area, as an anesthesiologist, was one. Travis Clardy from up in Nacogdoches, Phil King from Weatherford, Tan Parker, Phil Price over in Amarillo, Drew Darby, Eric Johnson was the only Democrat that had filed and said he was going to run. Inevitably, all of those people dropped out of the speaker's race and lended their support to Dennis Bonnen. So there was not a huge competition. This way, there was also not many hard feelings. When everybody's unanimous, they go into the session in one alignment, at least you hope. Speaker Bonnen was sworn in the first day of session and is in the process of appointing his committees. So the committee structure in Austin will be, by and large, in the House of Representatives, totally different than it was the last several years. People who serve on the committee may differ, and chair or co-chair the committee will likely differ. So there's a whole new group of players on this team, and you'll see them jockeying for their positions of power and influence, and particularly those kinds of things that their constituents want them to push through the legislature. The Democrats did pick up 12 seats in the fall election of 2018. This is about twice what was predicted, by the way. They were thought they would get about 5 or 6 seats, but actually came up with a significant increase of 12, yielding a total of 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats to make up the 86th legislature. 28 of those individuals are freshmen, first-year legislators, so that means they're going to be finding out all the pertinent information of the Capitol, like where the bathrooms are, what's the best time to go to the cafeteria, and Thursday afternoon ice cream in the cafeteria. They'll learn so much important stuff their first year there. Also, the way things work, if you're a first-year legislator, you get the most. Well, you don't get your choice of offices, let me just put it that way. You get the office that's furthest from committee rooms and the House floor, and you also get the smallest offices that are available. So when you go up and visit somebody or talk with your legislature, they've been there for, 10, 15 years. They're going to be in one of those big executive offices in the main Capitol. If they haven't been there so long, they're going to be in a little cubicle type office in the furthest part of the basement of the main Capitol. That happens also in Washington. Actually, in Washington, if you're a first-year congressman, you get the floor that's the highest in the Sam Rayburn building, and it doesn't have an elevator. So you go up to the third floor and walk up the stairs to get to your office. So there's some little interesting traditions. One that just is sure that everybody understands what the pecking order is and who you're beholden to, even for your office. So the Texas Senate is across the hallway. It's on the eastern side of the Capitol rather than western, where the House is. And the Democrats picked up 2 seats. They lost one in a special election. So the alignment is significant in the Senate. Just the 2 seats they did get changes the voting balance dramatically, but because before the Senate was able to have a supermajority of Republicans, and in doing that, it was pretty much routine for them to not consider much legislation or even need the votes of their Democratic senators. That's not true this year, so we'll have to see who becomes more independent in their voting pattern. And there are some that will do that will align themselves with the majority party in order to get their legislation through the Senate and things particularly of interest to their local community. They'll want to do that. There are 19 Republicans and 12 Democrats. The newest members include Carol Alvarado, who's a Democrat. Carol replaced who? Sylvia Garcia in Houston. Sylvia was a really good friend to UTMB through some of our alumni supporters. Sylvia was also a strong champion of women's rights, reproductive health, and also women's and children's services. And Carol is cut from that same mold, is very, very focused on Medicaid, CHIP, and those kinds of issues in the support of families. So I think you'll find her a person who will be very easy to talk to about your HIV education mission. Pat Fallon, Pete Flores, Nathan Johnson, Angela Paxton. Is that a familiar name? Paxton? We have an attorney general named that, and he is her husband. And then we have Beverly Powell. So we have a lot of new faces, and again, some of these people, it's the first time they've ever held public office. So they're going to be catching up to speed of what the agendas are and garnering the approval of the pecking order in the House or Senate. And I think you probably appreciate, just like on the movies, on West Wing, and does anybody watch Designated Survivor and any of those Netflix things? It's the same kind of pecking order. If you are going to get a good appointment, you have really got to toe the line in supporting the chairman of your Senate or House, because you're not going to get a good committee appointment if you've done something to alienate them. So all of that vying for attention and all is going on right now this week. People have turned in their list and said, I want to be on this committee or that committee, and I want to chair this committee or that committee. So we'll see what the team that Mr. Bonin has put together will come up with in designating all of those committees. The state budget outlook is, you never want to use the word good, because you're just asking for a disaster. But it's not as bad as it could be. I'll put it that way. Why? Because there's about an 8% increase available in the budget if, underline if, the legislature chooses to spend it. We have $119 billion available according to the comptroller who certifies the budget. So they can spend up to that. There is $15.4 billion in the rainy day fund. And there's also about $5 billion in supplemental appropriation needs from the past 2 years. Well, how did that happen? I thought Texas had to have a balanced budget. Tell me more about that. Does Texas have a balanced budget in its constitution or not? Yeah, it does. So how do you balance a budget when you don't want to spend money? Well, you have this deferral process. And what you'll do is do things like not take into account in your budget that there's going to be an increase in the number of people on Medicaid rolls as that natural growth. Also, how many new kids do we have in Texas every year? How many kids are starting first grade every year? Well, if you don't know, it's somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000. So that's a lot of kids to build in your budget. But if you don't build it, and they came anyway, you just have to go back and appropriate later. So the way to get the budget balanced is to not appropriate the full amount of money they need and then come back and appropriate later. They do the same thing with the Medicaid program and the prison program. What they'll do is wait until you have spent the money, and then they'll come back and appropriate that. And you're always just really hoping and praying they're appropriating enough to cover what you spent. It's like buying on credit, but not knowing for sure you're going to get paid. It's a pretty harrowing experience when you get down to it for our folks trying to balance the budgets here on campus. So we never know until it's done. And the Texas budget, even today, how many pages is our budget? Does anybody know that? I like trivia. It's 1,001 pages. A book about this thick. And our law requires us, even with the automation we have and all, to print the budget. The budget has to be printed before the legislative session ends. And there's a printing shop that puts this and delivers it to all the offices where the budget can be certified. So it has to be in print. You would think by now that it could be in a PDF format in an Excel sheet or something. That would make good sense. But anyway, it's in that format, and believe me, everybody will have that little book of budget marked up with tags on it everywhere. It looked like a flower blooming by the end of the session, as people have noted every article. UTMB is in 3 articles. There are 11 articles in the budget. Article 2 has to do with Health and Human Services and those kinds of things. Article 3 is higher education. Article 5 is safety and prisons. So you have a whole area for each of those. And then there are other things like fish and wildlife and parks and recreation and highway department and all those kinds of things. But we are in 3 different areas. UTMB is pretty different than other medical schools in the state of Texas. Number 1, we own our own hospital. It is a state hospital, and therefore we get funding for it. Number 2, we have medical school, nursing school, allied health professions school, and a graduate school of biomedical sciences. So we have 3 schools, several institutes that other institutions do not have. And what's the third thing? The prison, yeah. We've got 3 things. You thought I was having a Rick Perry moment, didn't you? The third thing is a prison, and that alone is a $1 billion budget now. The health care that is appropriated for the prison has grown to be that large, $1 billion over a 2-year period of time. So that, just not funding the whole thing could mean we are behind in budget by $200 or even $300 million. So it's very, very important for us to work with the legislature to get all those numbers to balance. So just so that you understand that your budget as an employee of UTMB is a little different than others. And then when you get into the academic budget in that Article 3 area, what you're looking at is how much each of you as students, the state pays for your education. And even though they say they're doing a good job, they have cut that in years past, and we're not getting as much money as we did in 2001 to pay per head per student for educational purposes. So that comes from money in our clinical enterprise. That means when we're seeing patients, we take money from that and shift it over to help pay faculty salaries. So a lot of shifting and moving. Over a period of 20 years, we've gone from almost 40% of our budget provided by the state down to under 20% provided by the state. We earn the rest of it. So 80% comes through stuff that we do here on campus to support ourselves, which we think is good. Well, what are the issues that you're likely to see in the 86th legislative session? The ones you're going to hear on TV mostly are what? Name a couple for me. Audience participation is a good thing. Opioid overdose? Yeah. Now, would you be shocked to learn, just hypothetically, of course, if you encountered people with the attitude of, why should we worry about that? That just gets rid of some people who are breaking the law to begin with. Would you think you might ever encounter that kind of attitude? Yeah. So it'll be there, but unfortunately it's going to take a lot of education. We are still dealing with people, large numbers of people in Texas, who believe that an opioid addiction, or addiction in general, is a moral failure and a character disorder, not an illness. So again, know your audience and know what they know so you can be prepared to answer their questions. Opioids is one of the big things, but what you hear on TV every single day, public education. You can't listen to any of the major TV channels or NPR without a significant part of their time devoted to the fact that Texas kids can't read as well as kids in other states. we rank about 46th in the nation. As a pediatrician, that used to be one of the big concerns that we had, is every child, it still is a concern, every child would be able to read at least on a 3rd or 4th grade level when they finished elementary school. Well, that's a pretty low bar if you go back and look at that. 3rd grade education. What grade level do you gear most of your HIV education pamphlets and all in? 6th grade. So you'd have to assume here that you could be missing 50% or more of your audience if you're hitting at 6th grade. At 3rd grade, there's still a lot of pictures and things like that in the books. So the more you can do with graphics and things like that in education, the better off you are. But that message doesn't get out there as it should. So the other thing that's going to be a big thing out there, thank goodness, is mental health. We already have a commitment from Senator Jane Nelson, who is from Flower Mound, Texas, up near Dallas. She is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and she's been in the House longer than most people. In the Senate longer than most, and is really experienced in putting together a state budget. She has made a commitment to two things that are really important to us. Mental health support for residency programs for more psychiatrists and mental health workers in general. And she has also made a commitment for graduate medical education. The commitment for graduate education, we're in our 3rd year on, and so far she's provided for us over $100 million throughout the state for graduate medical education, and that will be broadened this year to include more money in the other health professions, not just medicine. So that is, or should be perceived as good news. She also has a program that she has embraced to push for mental health services in local schools. And this is a joint effort with the governor and other leaders in the state to tackle the issue of violence in public schools. The thought being, if we can embed psychiatric services in the school through telemedicine or actual improvement availability of trained counselors, then we'll be able to address some of the disturbing patterns that we have seen. Describe for me a typical shooter in high school. What does he look like, or she? Well, the reason I ask you that is because Dr. Jeff Temple, who you may know, one of our psychologists in the OB-GYN department, was asked that very question during the interim between the two sessions by a Senate and House panel. Tell me what a typical school shooter looks like. How would you identify him? First of all, he is a male. And secondly, he's white. And he is someone who is hiding in the shadows mostly. Has usually, we stereotypically think of a trench coat or lots of clothing on, kind of endomorphic body features and hiding out from people. Well, that could describe a whole lot of teenagers. I have them in my practice. So you have to have things that are better than that. You can't be suspicious of every kid who walks to school with a long coat on. But it would be helpful to be engaging those kids enough to find out what's on their mind before they do something very drastic. So there will be a lot more effort placed in training for teachers and school administrators. I think you're going to see a shift of emphasis away from administration in schools and more into teaching. The governor is pledging to increase school teachers' base salary by $5,000 per person per year to make teaching a little more attractive. You'd like for them to do that in nursing school too, wouldn't you, Jerry? That would be helpful. So in all of our schools, that would be nice. But anyway, making it a more livable wage where people will be attracted and not feel like they have to do a number of other things in order to make their budgets every month. So expect those things. Also expect some more scrutiny in the area of medicine. There'll be a lot of work done this session on vaccines. What sort of work? Yeah, we have a lot of people in Texas. It's a real hotbed for what are termed anti-vaxxers, people who do not want to vaccinate their children against anything. And we have some schools in Tyler and in Austin with insufficient vaccinations for school children that rank 50%, 60% of no vaccines. So that poses a problem for parents. God forbid, let's say that one of your children was on chemotherapy for leukemia, but well enough to go to school. You would like to know there's a herd immunity in that school so that they're not going to catch measles or any number of other maladies, wouldn't you? So last year, there was a proposal from the Texas Pediatric Society, TMA, and the Texas Academy of Family Physicians to enact a law that is called Parents' Right to Know. All that's required is that by school, in every school district, schools be identified as to what percent of the children are vaccinated. So you can make some plans as to what school you would choose to send your child to. And that failed to pass in the Texas House, because there are a lot of people who felt that that interferes on parents' rights, that the right to know is not as important as the right to say no. So it's, again, a good example of people not particularly being driven by data. If they grew up like I did in the 1950s and 60s and they saw people with polio, they would probably have a different attitude. And I know none of y'all are that old, but it was really a big deal. You didn't even go swimming during certain times of the year because of your fear of that. So a lot of other things on the agenda. Telemedicine is going to be one of them. Funding for the trauma centers, freestanding emergency rooms, and balanced billing, medical marijuana's use. And I think that is something that has in Texas going to get some play in the legislature, and I would be surprised if it didn't get passed, because there's some interest among mothers of autistic children where medical marijuana has been found useful for some of these kids, not all, but some. There's not a lot of study been done, but if you're a parent who's desperate with a child, and there's even one study out there that shows their hope, they're going to ask for the right to try medication. So I think you're going to see that coming down the line. UTMB has some specific legislative priorities itself. For those of you who have tuned in off campus, you'll not be able to see my bright green pointer here, but we are looking to convert our health system funding to a hospital formula like that of UTMB Anderson and UT Health Science Center Tyler. Right now, our hospital formula funding is lumped in with everything else. So when they give us a cut, our hospital formula funding is about $300 million per biennium. So that's a lot of money. The total funding is around, for the campus, gets up over $500 million. And when you're dealing with numbers that high, if they give us a 4% cut, 4% out of $500 million is a pretty hefty cut, isn't it? Well, how about the other schools that don't have a hospital, or their money is secured in their hospital because, like Tyler and Anderson, because it's in a special fund and it's sacrosanct, they don't get cut. What happens when we get cut? Well, last session, when we got cut, they took 60% of all health care reductions out of our budget. 60%. So that's a disproportional cut to us. We are simply asking to be treated like the other hospitals. And as I said, as I was starting to talk with you, most other schools don't own a hospital. Anderson and Tyler are the only two that do. Anderson is a specialty cancer hospital, and Tyler was a specialty hospital for the care of respiratory diseases. So the old TB hospital. We are also asking that they restore reductions from the 85th session. We had some dramatic reductions in our indigent care funding, over $15 million there. They cut out of indigent care. We also had dramatic reductions in the area health education centers, the dialysis program. We had reductions over $10 million in our primary care education program. UTMB is known best for its training of primary care physicians, internists, pediatricians, OB-GYN, and family medicine and psychiatry. And we, unfortunately, had to close a lot of those training precursor programs down. There was also a desire by us to have the educational infrastructure and research formula funding to get up to that threshold that I mentioned from 2001. That simply assures us that we can continue to grow the quality of our faculty and pay that faculty more than we've been able to in the past. And we also are looking for what's called a tuition revenue bond. You'll see it abbreviated TRB of $157 million for our League City campus to provide instructional space off-site from here, research, clinical services, and support functions. One of our goals would be to have a place here that we could do clinical trials in not just on the island, but off in a more densely populated area. So that would be extremely helpful, we believe, in the future. And then, of course, and I could take another day to talk to you just about the things we need in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and the kinds of uses we have there for more money, one of which is the improvement of the infrastructure in Hospital Galveston. Those of you who work over there know that there are some doors that don't work. You know that you have to question some of the equipment we use because it's been there for a long time. Some of it's even older than me. So we need those things. Those are our priorities. And it's our hope that we'll be able to convince the legislature to do that. None of these are a cruise to Kalamazoo or something. Nobody's making a junket out of this. There's no perks. There's no extra Starbucks to be built with this or things like that. These are all first-line things. We think we are a good user of resources for the state. They're getting a terrific return on the investment. We've grown our campus. We have 38 to 40% growth in the number of students or graduates at UTMB. And with that, we also have some of the highest performance on board scores of our students in all schools. Just fantastic. School of Nursing aces it, health professions in all their multiple areas, and so does the School of Medicine. So we have remarkable achievements there. At a time when NIH funding has been way down on other campuses, ours has been pretty even overall. So we're excited about that. We're excited about the growth we've seen, and we believe that is a good story. But you have to remember, in the political world, no good deed goes unpunished. You also have to know that they say, well, they're doing a good job making more with less. Maybe they can just keep doing that. And some of these other people who aren't as good at making more with less, we'll give them the money because we feel sorry for them. So you just have to realize there are two views. I want to give you an example, and some of you who have attended my lectures before have heard this one, but it's a realistic one. Now I'm going to give you an update, and we'll do a little talking. And that is during the 84th legislative session, so we count backwards. This is the 86th, and the one before it was the 85th, and the 84th. They're all numbered. We can keep up with them. We had a young man who's a physician, Dr. Spitzer from Athens, Texas. He's a surgeon. Introduced a measure in the House floor to strip $3 million in funding from AIDS education programs and transfer it to abstinence-only sex education programming. There was a debate, because most of those kinds of things are debatable. And how many of you have heard the story before? Okay, we got a couple. I won't feel bad about y'all just playing with your phone for a minute, okay? Well, Representative Spitzer got his budget passed because he believed with all of his heart and soul that abstinence is the best way to prevent HIV. Now, most of you in this room are very, very knowledgeable in the area of HIV infections. Would you agree with Representative Spitzer that abstinence is just the best way to prevent? But you know what happens, guys? You get a guy like him in front of the legislature, clean-cut young physician. Come on, he's a doctor. He knows everything. And he stands up there and he truly says, all my medical training tells me that this is the way it should be done. They're not going to impinge him and his knowledge. They're not going to do that. Mainly because it's telling them what they want to hear. He's telling them what they want to hear. They want to hear that because they want that $3 million to go somewhere else. So what happens? Anybody know Sylvester Turner? Who's he? Sylvester is now the mayor of Houston, but Sylvester has been one of the greatest advocates for the poor and underserved in this entire state. He always has been. And he is one of the people out there in the front lines leading the cause for prevention and for treating people who need to be treated, whether it's HIV or mental health disorders or what. And he asks, is it not significant that Texas has the third highest number of HIV cases in the entire country? And does it not bother you that there are people walking around with HIV undiagnosed? Because these funds were right out of the funds that would help us diagnose more people with screening programs. No movement. Then came Representative Pancho Nevarez. You feel as a medical doctor that the position you are taking, not just from a fiscal standpoint, is prudent for the medical community? And without blinking, he says, I do. This is the best thing to do with that $3 million. And Harold, I don't know whether you know Harold, but Harold reminds me of a movie actor. He has this gorgeous, awesome voice. And if you hear, he's an incredible historian. He spoke last year at the Juneteenth celebration here. If you ever get a chance to hear him, just go listen. He's like an actor that can tell a story. And so he says, you know, were you taught abstinence education and did it work? And Spitzer makes it a little personal, and there was a lot of discomfort in the room. This is the entire Texas legislature sitting there. And he says, you know, I've had sex with one woman in my life, and that's my wife. And then Harold says, well, since you brought it up, is that the first woman you asked? And Spitzer says, I don't think that's an appropriate question. So things then got a little tense, and woe to people who have someone who's really smart, like Nicole Collier, and gets the CDC guidelines out for HIV treatment and stands at the back microphone and proceeds to ask Spitzer question after question after question on treatment, which he could not answer. He said, oh, you say you could not get STDs without having sex. It depends on what your definition of sex, he says. If you still think you can't get an STD without having sex, then maybe we need to educate you. So a pretty intense exchange. Remember where this is coming from? It's on the floor of the Texas legislature. It's public. It's not private. It's live streamed. You can go back on this date and you can check it and hear it for yourself. Do you think, my question to you is, whoops, I got my thumb spastic. Do you think, this one, he's providing an opinion based on his medical knowledge or on his personal belief systems? Fact or fiction? Well, as a healthcare provider, did you ever have difficulty, or did you have difficulty sorting out early in your career what's your personal preference or your personal belief from what's really factual? Didn't you find it easy to be very judgmental? And I have a friend in residency. Many of you know my history goes back to early in my career doing a lot of work on child abuse prevention. I remember being in the emergency room and a little girl who had been very seriously sexually abused. And one of my fellow residents came in and he was going to talk with her because he was admitting resident and I was on the emergency room. And he needed to admit her because of some vaginal tears and all that she had. And so Roy said, Lori, did that man do nasty with you? And I said, Roy, is that what you tell your wife when you go home after a hard day's work? Is let's go do nasty? I said, let's talk about it. Let's a perception here. You know, but people sometimes get, you know, this, even medical people do the stupidest things in the world. But the OB-GYN resident down, who was one of my fraternity brothers, and I took care of his kids. He ended up having 5. His wife was a OT or PT, but you know, he took one look at the little girl, and what he saw was really his own little girl, who was the same age, and he threw up in the garbage can. Because sometimes you have to put your own feelings way back as a healthcare provider. And I'm saying that mainly for the students here. Because if you bring into that room a lot of your own personal, particularly wrong impressions about people, you're going to have a really hard time of connecting with them culturally, where they're coming from, about their lifestyle, about their disease, and you'll miss incredible opportunities for education. And I feel sorry for Dr. Switzer. He, by the way, did not get be elected to that position. He was a one-term state representative. I don't know whether it's because of that or not. But if you look him up on Wikipedia, this whole incident, not in as much detail as I've given you, is cited with a reference. Because that's one of the lasting things to his activities in the legislature that's noted, is he killed the ability to provide more funding for HIV education, and did that by transferring the funds over to teen abstinence. It was also kind of significant that his particular district had the highest rate of teen pregnancy and also had the highest rate of STDs. So anyway, how would you go leading into something here about educating legislators on issues like this? What do you think would be a good... I'm going to pick on you because you're right here, Joanne. I'm going to look you in the eye. How would you go about educating them?
Educating
The legislature. You can phone a friend. Ask her. Fast? Facts. Facts. Numbers and facts are very, very important. But what is the most important thing you can provide a legislator?
Experiences that I had talking to our clients.
Exactly. Facts. Nothing's going to speak to that legislator more than me taking you by the hand, please, and saying, I want you to meet Katie. Katie is one of the people that got this particular disease, pick one, got a contagious disease like measles from somebody who was unimmunized, and it was because they were sitting in our clinic and didn't have their immunizations. That is powerful. Katie's face will speak more than any facts in the world. Facts are important, but you know, facts are depersonalized. And they hide those patient stories that you're talking about. That's who we need them to see. It makes them uncomfortable. After you see that child who, for instance, got HIV from a hemophiliac transfusion, it kind of changes your perspective. We're talking about that could be my kid or my neighbor's kid. Let's sit back and talk about how we need to spend money educating people, how we need screening programs, how we need all of these things. So, you understand where I'm coming from here? It's putting a face on those facts that's really going to help. And you do start off with those facts. You've got to convince them, first of all, that this is a problem, that it's something that's significant and we ought to be aware of it. Illustrating the issue where necessary demographic data is out there, but that human face hits the media. Do you think people were upset about the kids on the border getting tear gas? I would say not a whole lot until they saw pictures of them. Their eyes swollen and them grabbing for their mothers. I think that picture's worth 1,000 words. The same is true about the kids who died of dehydration and lack of medical care recently. In the Texas Pediatric Society, we try to put a name and a face, when appropriate, to any of those kids, because you can't get that out of your mind when you're asleep at night. That comes back because there's a good story there. Lay out the factual and logical propositions or positions that you support. Provide the cost impact. If we don't do this, this is what it's going to cost in the way of disease burden, in the way of money in general. Nothing else. Most people have heard their grandma say a stitch in time saves 9 1,000 times, so they need to learn that. They also need to take in consideration human suffering. We don't talk about that as much. We should. What's the pain and suffering added to society because of some of the things we don't speak up to prevent or to educate people about? And then the overall cost to the state. We've learned, particularly in our HIV programs in the correctional health care, if we can keep people well and they're not in the ICU, boy, do we save a lot of money. That's one of the best programs in the world. That's been around for a long time, but it's still, if you go through and look at mortality and morbidity statistics in that population, they're some of the best in the whole world because we are proactive. Every patient knows what their CD4 count is. They know what meds they're on, and they're conversant enough that if they get out and don't have an appointment to get to the right clinic, which they should have now, they're at least able to go into a doctor and say, this is what's wrong with me, and this is what medicine I've been taking. So, hallelujah, that's good. Also, sometimes you just have to realize that no matter what you do, there's that alt-right viewpoint, the contrarian, who's going to say, no, I don't agree with you, you're wrong. The world is square, or flat, or oblong, or something, They're just going to confound you with their stupidity. So again, AIDS is caused by individual moral failure. No, okay? But you're going to find people in the legislature with that mentality. And the one thing you never want to do with a state legislator is enter into an argument, particularly in the public. And it's most often best said, just, Senator or Mr. House Member, I appreciate your opinion, and I would just ask you to consider the opinion of others on that issue also, and consider the facts and the people and the cost to the state of Texas. So, have a way of dealing with that. And you also get this attitude that people don't deserve special treatment. And is that true? We have that idea even with our children who have disabilities that will not provide for them physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy services. Why should we do that? Let their parents. It's the same attitude that people have about everybody should have a healthcare savings account. I want you to think about that. How many times have you heard about healthcare savings account? And your politicians tell you that's a good thing to do. Do you honestly think the person who served me up my large cup of iced tea this morning at Whataburger is making enough money to put $1,000 a month into a healthcare savings account? No. The average person in America, 50% of Americans, can only lay their hands on about $700 if there's an emergency. They're not there. So healthcare savings account is great for the privileged. It's great for people who are head of major corporation. Someone like that, sure, and it's a tax loophole. You can get that, but it's not going to help the average person out there. Anything related to sex or drug use should be handled by the family and not the state is also a firm belief by more and more people these days. Stay out of my personal affairs, in other words. So you're going to encounter all of those other viewpoints. You just need to be aware of them and not let them get you off track. You can design your own fact sheet stating the issue, the impact it relates to society, and also the best practices that are out there that you know work and why the state should follow those. So just wanted to remind you that the Affordable Care Act has had a positive impact on coverage for people with HIV. So has Medicaid expansion. I'll know what Medicaid expansion is. Did Texas do that? How much money did we pass up by not doing that? If I told you $8 billion a year, would you believe it for the last 7 years? Anyone good at math? $56 billion? Well, who got the money that we passed up? Where'd it go? Did you pay less taxes because we, our citizens, didn't get that money? No, you didn't. The state of California predominantly got most of it, and New York, because they did expand Medicaid, and the money went there for them to have a more robust schedule. As a matter of fact, it's so robust there that our politicians, in essence, have helped fund their Medicaid expansion program that will also include immigrants now. So, you know, shine light on what people are doing with money. I think it's very contrary to what the very position that people opposed to that hold. Texas also has the highest uninsured rate in the entire nation. That means we have more people still coming to our emergency room than anybody else who do not have health insurance. So we're getting penalized by that. If at least they had Medicaid, we'd be able to bill those charges and get credit for that, and our disproportionate share payments do not come to UTMB. They are passed through and go back to the state. So we don't get additional Medicaid, and we don't get the disproportionate share monies either. So a couple of bad things for us. When you're going up to Advocate, any of you ever do that? Do you ever go up to Austin and make rounds and with your students or anybody? Yeah, I know Phil does, and a lot of others have thought about it at least. The short course is when you do that, most often the easiest thing is to do it with your professional society. If you're a student nurse, go with your student nursing groups. If you're a faculty member, go with a group of nursing faculty, the Texas Nursing Association or others. Linda Rounds does some of that each year. I think y'all know her. And who works with her? There are a couple. I can't remember, Jerry. I'll have to get those names. Also, the opportunity to take student groups, I think, is really important. Because if the students don't participate, they'll never learn how important being an advocate for a patient is. Patients often don't get to be up there, but you do. So before I'm just totally out of the last 5 minutes of time, are there any questions? I think Medicaid, we've already been told that Medicaid will not get as generous of funding as it did last year. In fact, they're anticipating decreasing the amount of money in the budget for Medicaid. So that will not be good news. That means reimbursement to hospitals or providers will go down, or they will start cutting out some services provided by Medicaid. And that may be like the old days where they limited you to only a certain number of prescriptions, or it may be that you can have shorter times of eligibility, all the things that are designed to keep people in line and ratchet down the level of services. I am a little more encouraged today than I was 2 days ago. The new Medicaid director is a young man named Ryan Van Ramshorst, Ramshorst. Ryan is a graduate of the University of Houston Health Science Center, did his pediatric residency in San Antonio, and is on the executive committee of the Texas Pediatric Society Board and has led our legislative committee for 6 years. And he was just named the chief medical officer for Texas Medicaid and CHIP. So I think that will be somebody that is sensitive to the issues, the problems, and someone also that we know on board to help us with any difficulties we have. It will not give him the authority to make decisions above his rank, another pecking order there. But we also, for the first time, in the driver's chair at Health and Human Services Commission, have an experienced chief of the entire organization who has multiple years experience, a doctorate degree in healthcare administration, local to the southern United States, started her career in New Orleans, has worked for the Louisiana Medicaid programs, and then in the Midwest. She comes down to Texas 3 months ago to take over the programs here. And my meetings I've had with her are very positive. I think she's going to do a really good job. The question is, will the legislature play hands off and let her do her job? You know how much money the Medicaid program is? How many billion? Roughly $95 billion. This is like a major Wall Street corporation. The budget of Texas itself is the 5th largest governmental budget in the world, ahead of the country of Spain. So that is a huge responsibility to take care of the Health and Human Services budget of a state this large and with this many people. So they bring someone in and to do that job, and they pay them almost nothing compared to their responsibility. So it's really hard to get top-flight people who have a track record of experience and high achievement. And the pay scales are so poor. So, thank you for hearing me out. That's all I have to say. Oh, we will have our usual blogs starting up hopefully next week.